it's April and we're starting a new series looking at unity metaphysics, and we're going to do it from a slightly different and new perspective. I mentioned in the most recent issue of our newsletter a couple of books that were co-written by Reverend Paul Hasselbeck, who used to teach metaphysics at Unity Institute and also as part of our continuing education program. Here are the books. There's Smiling Paul right in the middle. The first book is called Get Over It, the truth about what you know that just ain't so. And the second book is Get Over These Two, more truth about what you know that just ain't so. Each chapter is devoted to a catchphrase, a platitude, a euphemism, or a saying that we hear in Unity and also maybe in spiritual pop culture, with an invitation to take it deeper, to take a deeper look at the words that we use in order to find out if we're really expressing something that's true or if we're just perpetuating misunderstanding because, well, hey, that's the way we've always done it, right? That's what can happen. More truth about what we know that just ain't so. We sometimes think we know something, and sometimes we are so certain that we just know that it's true that we refuse to accept irrefutable evidence to the contrary. I remember when I was a kid growing up in South Milwaukee, Wisconsin, just down the street from where we lived was Oak Creek. Or do you call them cricks out here? I think we probably called it a crick back there in the Midwest. Oak Creek. And that was back in the days, back in the 60s, when you could get on your bicycle and disappear and explore the world for hours on end and nobody got too worried about it, right? It was kind of a different world back then. Well, one of the things, with that creek right down the street, one of the things we would try to do as kids, we try to catch things that were in the creek, which was pretty much just an excuse for getting wet and muddy. As if a kid really needed that, but we were trying to catch something, fish, whatever it is. And what we do is we get a net, like a butterfly net with a handle on it, and you'd stand on the bank and you'd put the net in the water and you'd scrape it up along the bank, and you'd catch these little things that, well, to us they look like little crabs. We called them crabs. Now, today I know that they're crawfish, or crayfish as some people say, but we didn't know that as kids. As kids, those were crabs, by God, because they had the little pinchers and things like that. Well, one day this new kid moves into the neighborhood, and he comes up and asks what we're doing, and he says, "Oh, those aren't crabs." He says, "Those are crawfish or crayfish." And as I look back on it now, I think the kid was probably from Louisiana or something like that, so he probably knew what he was talking about. He probably called them mud bugs too. I think that's what they call them down there. But he said they're crayfish, and we told him he's nuts, right? So he runs home, and of all the nerve, he comes back with a book, and he shows us a picture of this little critter, and by gosh, you looked at that picture and you looked at what was in the net and you said, wow, and it had the name crawfish underneath it. And so us kids put our heads together, and after considerable deliberation, we concluded that it was an elaborate forgery. That crabs they were, and crabs they would always be. Now, someone, look at this, someone comes along and offers to enlighten us, to deepen and expand our understanding of the world around us, and we say, no thanks. I'd rather stay right where I am, mired in ignorance and delusion, right? Why do we do that? Lots of reasons. Last week I mentioned that there's a great deal of comfort in certainty, and of course we resist change in just about any form. Heaven forbid we should have to change our mind. There's comfort in certainty even when it's wrong. It's easier to just accept stuff without question. I mean, why go to all that bother, right? Crayfish, crab, what's the difference? Where's the harm? Well, I would submit that there is always always some kind of harm when we believe things without adequate reasons. Same thing happens with a lot of those urban legends that we see going around on the internet, especially Facebook. Hey, if it's on Facebook, it has to be true, right? People just know that it's true, and it's surprising how few people actually check on the accuracy of these stories before they send them off to thousands and thousands of people. Snopes is our friend. Snopes is our friend. Okay, so we're talking about unity metaphysics today, and metaphysics is really for inquiring minds, because we're trying to get beyond the physical appearance of things to a deeper truth that might lie beyond the physical appearance of things. You know, the world of the five senses is wonderful, but it doesn't always give us 100% of the information that we really need to make sense of the world, to make meaning of the world, to explore intangible things like values and all of those other things that make life worth living. So if the senses don't get it right all the time, what can I rely on? And that's a matter of debate and dialogue that's been going on for thousands of years. Our understanding changes. It grows, and there are times when the words and the phrases that we use don't keep up with the times, don't keep up with what we know, with what we're learning. Which brings us to one of the chapters in the book, Get Over These Two. And one of the phrases that Paul wants us to get over is this one right here. I behold the Christ in you. Wow. Kind of sounds like blasphemy, doesn't it? He wants us to get over it. How dare we even question the truth or the accuracy of that statement? Because you hear it all the time in unity, don't you? I behold the Christ. What could possibly be wrong with saying that? Well, we not only dare to question it, in unity we welcome questions like this. Now, I'm not saying we have to drop it. Neither is Paul. Paul's not saying drop it. It's okay. Nobody is going to jump on you for saying, I behold the Christ in you. There's no such thing as unity thought police, or maybe I should say new thought police. Paul is just challenging us in order to raise consciousness. He's challenging us to explore just exactly what we mean when we say the Christ within, or I behold the Christ in you. And the problem that Paul points out is that when we say it like that, it's almost like we're suggesting that what we call the Christ is something different or something separate from us. Like it's a thing inside of us. Paul refers to this as wiener in the bun theology. Where's that? I got an illustration. I'm pretty sure he didn't have that kind of wiener in mind. Probably more like this next one here. There we go. There we go. And I'm happy to see that this graphic gets it right, because I will tell you that I know that the only proper way to consume a hot dog is with mustard. No ketchup, none of that kind of stuff. But wiener in the bun theology, or for you vegetarians out there, maybe a chocolate chip cookie. Chocolate chip and the cookie theology, right? It's a theology that says the chip is in the cookie surrounds the chip, and they are forever different and separate. The chip is never the cookie is never the chip, right? That's what it sounds like we're saying when we say, I behold the Christ in you. That's an example of dualistic thinking, where the human being and the Christ are considered to be two separate things. Now, you may have noticed that the name of this movement is unity, not duality. So this is something serious for us to explore. So yes, of course, the Christ is within us, but it's more than that. It is us. It's the entirety of us and more. When we say the Christ within, we want to make sure that we're not suggesting that it's something that's contained inside the body. That's the same way that people used to talk about the soul as something spiritual that was encased in a non-spiritual body. See what we do there? We turned the body into something that is somehow less than spiritual, which meant that soul and body were separate things. And of course, to the way of thinking at one time, if something wasn't spiritual, then it was less than. It was not as good as. And that's a problem, because once again, this is the unity movement, not the separation movement. Our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, he had something really big in mind when he talked about the Christ. And to him, I think, the Christ meant consciousness itself. Here's the quote. "We have no independent mind. There is only universal mind. But we have consciousness in that mind, and we have control over our own thoughts. And our thoughts make up our consciousness. By analyzing ourselves, we find that we unconsciously separate ourselves into different personalities. We should do this work consciously. We should enter into the understanding that the I am power is given to us in consciousness, and then join or unify that consciousness with the great Christ mind." There's a lot to unpack there, but I think what he's getting at is this idea that we need to unify things and not separate them. And Charles says that we should do this work consciously, and it is work. It is work. It requires our attention, it requires our time, our reflection, our contemplation. I've been facilitating a class that meets on the fourth Monday of every month, where we've been talking about the frontiers of consciousness. And we're exploring some of the leading edge ideas about consciousness. And it's been only about 20 years now since scientists have started seriously studying consciousness. And there is no real consensus yet. All that any of us can say for sure is that I am. I am. I am conscious now. Think about it. Are you conscious now? Yes, I hope so. I have this subjective sense that I am. And I can't doubt it. And it can't be an illusion. There it is. And this is something, this sense that I am, this is something that I share in common with every other human being on the planet. And perhaps some animals too. And maybe even a computer someday. Who knows? Who knows what we're going to find out? In that sense, consciousness is a collective experience, that one mind, that great mind that Charles talks about. And yet at the same time, I can't know exactly how it looks from another person's perspective. It's not possible. We do have separate and different personalities because each of us has separate and different life experiences. We can't occupy the same space in the same time. We can't have the same life experiences. Now, that's not a problem. None of that's a problem as long as we don't turn it into an absolute boundary or turn it into a barrier. I've never climbed Mount Everest. I've never walked on the surface of the moon. I don't know what that's like. I don't know what it's like to be Muslim or Jewish. But so what? How does that make me fundamentally and qualitatively different from people who have done those things, who have had those experiences? It doesn't. Here's a bit of wisdom about these kinds of distinctions. Now there's something you don't see every day. Right? There's something you don't see every day. There's this bear sitting at a picnic table, and the bear is looking solemnly at the camera saying, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, atheists, they all taste like chicken. It gives new meaning to that phrase. Deep down inside, we're all the same, right? Just depends on the perspective that you bring to it. And yet human beings, we seem to have no problem setting up these kinds of rigid distinctions and separating people and erecting all of these barriers based on all sorts of superficial distinctions, like some of the ones that we just saw up there. I mean, all that stuff is superficial compared to what we have in common, which is consciousness itself. I am not a being to which consciousness has been appended or embedded. I am a conscious, self-aware being. It is inseparable. When it comes to human consciousness, we have the option to exercise empathy, compassion, altruism. Everyone. Those who have walked on the moon and those who haven't. Altruism. There's a word we don't hear too often, or I should say we don't hear it often enough. Here's what it means. Altruism is the belief in or practice of disinterested and selfless concern for the well-being of others. Altruism in the natural world is an exception, not the rule. But in human affairs, we want altruism to be the rule and not the exception, and we can do that. Altruism, hence the golden rule, right? The golden rule, part of the moral and ethical teachings of every religion that we know of. It too is not found in nature, but it seems to naturally emerge from human consciousness, which is a part of nature when you think about it. Just that somehow we are uniquely tasked, uniquely equipped to put these kind of things into motion in the world. By right of consciousness, we are co-creators, and if we want things like justice and compassion, we have to create them. And I would submit that once we create them, they are just as natural as anything else out there, because you and I are part of nature as well. Now, in our Western culture, we happen to know about the golden rule and the principle of altruism primarily through the teachings of Jesus. That's how they're presented to most of us. I say most of us as children, especially if we grew up in a family that practiced Christianity, which is probably the majority of us here today. That's just the way it is in this culture. For Christians, Jesus was the Christ. For Christians, Jesus was the Jewish Messiah. Jewish people would disagree. Jewish people would choose some other example of the golden rule. They would personify the golden rule in a different way. They probably use one of the ancient Jewish prophets who talked about justice and compassion and empathy. So Christianity does not have a patent on the golden rule. I'm not a fan of postmodern relativism. But the simple fact is that the way we use the word Christ in unity is just an expression of our own Western cultural bias. It works for us. That's our language. Actually, it's our jargon. But we're really talking about something bigger, something universal. I behold the Christ in you. The Christ. That's the personification of the golden rule, of altruism, of empathy and compassion in human form. Aspects of consciousness which we share and which unite us. The Christ, our shared experience of consciousness that is grounded in altruism, compassion, the golden rule. Paul Hasselbeck has a simple suggestion for what we can do to emphasize that sense of unity and oneness instead of reinforcing dualism or reinforcing the wiener in a bun theology, as he likes to call it. Here's one way of saying it, the one we're most familiar with, I behold the Christ in you. Paul suggests we simply do this. Drop the last two words. I behold the Christ. Problem solved. No duality. Such a simple and elegant solution. And again, nobody's going to jump on you if you leave the words in you at the end. This is just a consciousness-raising exercise, and I think it really works. I'm actually looking forward to the day when we don't need the word Christ anymore. Maybe one day we'll have a word that's more universal in its meaning, a word that has a counterpart in all cultures and all languages. Now that's going to be another step in our global evolution, and in this part of the world it's going to take some doing, especially in America where the stink of Calvinism still lingers. Calvinism, that terrible ideology that says that humans can't be Christ-like because we are utterly corrupt and depraved. We have centuries of that kind of idiocy to overcome and to get rid of. So our work is cut out for us, and that's why we need an affirmation like, I behold the Christ. Let's say it, let's use it freely, and let's know what we mean by it with a deeper understanding and a deeper appreciation so that we don't create duality and separation, but affirm our unity and our oneness. I behold the Christ. How about you?
I behold the Christ.
All right. See you next week.